Okay, we're live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me is Angelo Giuliano. This is not an episode of Inflection. This is just an update because we're living in unprecedented times. This is an unprecedented conflict that we're watching unfold. We're going to be talking about Russia's special operations. This is day 9 in Ukraine. We're going to be talking about the latest developments. We're also going to be talking about pro-NATO analysis that has basically said Ukraine has no chance of stopping Russia. And everything that you're seeing in the media is absolute propaganda, war propaganda, to make people believe that there's some kind of hope and to get them behind the West, to just galvanize the West, because this is a big push against Russia and then also a big push against China. And we're going to talk about Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State in Taiwan, just now talking about how Taiwan needs to be independent. So what the United States did to Russia through Ukraine, they will do to China through Taiwan. And this is all connected. We're going to show you how this is all connected. Angela, what are your thoughts watching this operation unfold as of today? What are you seeing? What are you thinking before we get into any more?
Well, indications are very clear. I mean, the Russian army is far stronger than the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian army has no chance. And we hear those calls about, having protect the airfield, what you call it, not having
the no-fly zone.
The no-fly zone and sending fighter jets to Ukraine. I mean, this would be equal to a declaration of war from NATO. So there's so much misinformation, and Zelensky is all in the middle of that. He's saying, well, we are going to have 16,000 mercenaries going to Ukraine. I think this is just madness. Zelensky should stop, should surrender, and because now he doesn't have at heart his people. I think it's exposing that he's not the president of Ukraine. He's a U.S. agent, and he's listening to the U.S. Every single decision he's taking is actually asking the U.S., and he comes back. And what they want here is to further demonize Russia. How they do that? The more civilians casualties you have, the more they are going to demonize Russia. And you see, they want to take Russia to court. I mean, imagine. I mean, how long did they wait? And actually, it's a court that even the U.S. doesn't recognize. So they say, if you are going to put some Americans on that court, we actually are going to sanction you. So there's so much hypocrisy, and I'm shocked. You know what I'm shocked at is how much racism there is against Russians. I'm shocked at the dimension of the sanctions. I mean, we are talking about sanctions on people that actually are not denouncing Russia. I mean, Russians, like Russian artists, they have to denounce like Russia. I mean, who would do that? I mean, if you believe in what your country is doing, why would you ask me to do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And to the extent that it's unseen, the Olympic Committee, they're banning Russians and Belarusian athletes. It's unseen. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely. Angela, I'm having some connection issues on my side. So if I disappear, just keep going. And I'll be back as soon as I can.
Don't do that.
Try not to. Yeah. So what's really important here is because I'm still seeing this. I'm still seeing this from people in the alternative media that Russia has invaded a sovereign country. No, it did not. Ukraine has not been a sovereign country since 2014. And I want to go through a list here. And we're going to have to do this mantra every single time we talk about this, just to drum it into people's heads what actually really happened here, and stop waffling back and forth. The U.S. is going for the kill. So if you're an anti-imperialist and you've been fighting all of this time against what the U.S. has been doing in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, all across Africa, all across Latin America, if you've been doing that all of this time, now you're waffling because now someone is finally pushing back and you're going to do this anti-war thing. You need to wake up, because this is for all the marbles. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. It has not been a sovereign country since 2014. You had Victoria Nuland out of the U.S. State Department admit that they pumped $5 billion into Ukraine's political system. That is not a sovereign political system. That is a system now beholden to foreign interference. We say over and over again, democracy is a process of self-determination. What is going on in Ukraine is being determined in Washington. It couldn't be more obvious. And Angela brought up President Zelensky and what he's doing right now, prolonging the war and getting as many people killed as possible. And whose interest is that? Ukraine's? No, they have no way of winning this war. They have 0% chance of winning this war. Whose benefit? Washington's. Washington to bleed Russia as much as possible. That is it. That is it. It's just exactly what their strategy in Syria is right now, since the US completely lost that regime change war. And so we're starting to see patterns. People need to see this. So there was that. There was the fact that after the 2014 coup, it was a coup, it was an armed coup. They overthrew the elected government of Ukraine. That regime was handpicked by the US, the one that went in afterwards. That is not democracy. That is not a country that has sovereignty. That is a country that is now captured by the United States. It does not need its military in Ukraine to make it an occupied country at that point. It's occupying it through its proxies. But also, the US did start putting US troops in Ukraine. They were training Ukraine's military. They were arming Ukraine's military. As a matter of fact, let's take a look at this. Let me share the screen here. This was January. So this was before Russian operations began. U.S. plane brings Javelin missiles and launchers to Ukraine. So they're bringing in $200 million security package to shore up Ukraine as it braces for a possible Russian military offensive. The United States has committed more than $650 million of security assistance to Ukraine in the past year, and more than $2.7 billion in total since 2014. So this was the US militarizing Ukraine. Let's see, where's the other one? There's this one from 2017. All of my windows have to reload because I'm having these connection issues. This is USNI News, the US Navy. US Navy Seabees building Maritime Operations Center on Black Sea coast in Ukraine. The US was building military installations in Ukraine. Now, what is important to point out here is that in modern warfare, when you pass a certain threshold of militarization of another country, that makes it off limits. When you're a nuclear armed superpower, that makes it off limits. And then Russia's ability to ever change that threat sitting directly on its border is gone forever. How do we know this? We look at Syria. The United States got that foothold in eastern Syria, and they were going to expand that. Russia intervened on the side of the Syrian government at the Syrian government's invitation, and they carved out a security zone incorporating almost all of Syria's major cities. Once Russia did that, the United States could not expand its base any further. And likewise, Russia and Syria cannot go into US-held territory until the US leaves by other means. And this same process was unfolding in Ukraine directly on Russia's border. That's why they acted now, because if they waited, they would be out of options. They would have a bastion of NATO military force, whether Ukraine joined or not. It was already de facto being NATOized right on Russia's border. It was unacceptable. It's a threat to Russia's existence, because after that, the US was going to push into Belarus and into Russia with their regime change, their destabilization efforts, their economic sanctions. It was not going to end. In previous episodes, and then I'll let you get a word in edgewise, Angela. Sorry for
I think all great points. I actually think it's important for people to understand that war started a long time ago. You know, there's this concept of hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is through regime change. How much meddling the US has done. I mean, Chechnya war, it was all the US creating chaos within Russia. In China has been attacked through Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong. I mean, the war started a long time ago. What we're heading towards is at best, Cold War, at worst is going to be a hot war. But it was unavoidable, you know. And what Putin did was, you know, there's a saying. They say, well, when war is unavoidable, you have to strike first, and that's what he did, because the plan was a long-term war. And again, in this whole strategy is hitting Russia, and the ultimate prize for global hegemony is going to be China. And China knows that. This is why you have this informal relationship. I mean, not that transparent. They don't call it an alliance, but it is the de facto alliance between Russia and China, because they're so complementary. Russia is essential to China. Why? Because gas, oil, all those resources that China doesn't have. And how the US could contain China is by doing blockade, and this is why this partnership is extremely important. So it's important to see what is next. And you have two fronts. We discussed about this before. There's going to be a second front. They're opening a second front. They prepared this for a long time ago, and it's going to be Taiwan. That's the next. People need to start seeing that. The next is going to be Taiwan. Now it's just a matter of time. There's this window of opportunity, and it's only 10 years. Remember this Rand Corporation paper in 2016. They said clearly we have between 2015 to 2025 to hit China and to contain it. After that, it's going to be too late. So this is why we are 2022, and they know the clock is ticking. And sometimes, I mean, you look through history, wars are a good way to reset. Your economy is collapsing, your democracy is not functioning, it's a chaos internally. It's a way to do a reset. And that's what the US are doing. It's a reset. When you enter into an economy of war, and maybe it's a rejuvenation of your economy. I mean, it's very sad, but we've seen it in Second World War.
Angelo, where did I get cut off? And I think I'm going to end up getting cut off over and over again. Where did I get cut off? Do you
I'm not sure. It was very short. I think it was very short. No, I didn't.
Okay, hold on.
Sure.
So I got say Stephen Day saying Putin is cracking down within Russia. He's cracking down on US-sponsored protests. These are Navalny's people. And so people like this I'm getting rid of, because you could go to Fox News, you can go to wherever, and you could go talk about how Putin is wrong for defending himself. Defending Ukraine. Ukraine has been captured by the United States for 8 years now. And then illegitimate regime has sicked the military apparatus infested with literal Nazis on half of the population, killing them by the thousands. This is self-defense. This is not a war of choice, as the White House is now calling it. And and about Nazis, I've seen people over and over again and say, it's Azov, there's only 300. It's funny because the number keeps getting bigger and bigger when they bring it up. It's 300, it's 900, there's only a couple of thousand. It's like, how many Nazis does the Ukrainian government need to officially incorporate into its armed forces before it becomes a problem? The number is only one. If the government is officially bringing Nazis into the security apparatus, the entire regime is illegitimate. The entire regime is complicit with their ideology, and the crimes against humanity that they have been carrying out under the direction of Kiev and with weapons and money provided by Kiev. It is not a paramilitary organization. It is part of Ukraine's National Guard. In 2015, according to Reuters, let's get this article up here. According to Reuters, 2015, there were already over 1,000 of them. By now, there's thousands of them. By 2015, Reuters says they had infantry, artillery, and a tank force. You can find Azov units in every single major city of Ukraine right now. So there's a serious Nazi problem in Ukraine. It is not like in the US or in Russia, where you have these paramilitary or political groups that are outside of the government, outside of normal society. This was deliberately, officially incorporated into Ukraine's government. So it's totally different, and it is entirely, there's no excuse. If Nazis are wrong, then Ukraine's government is wrong for incorporating them knowingly into their armed forces. It wasn't like they overlooked something or someone slipped through the cracks. This was very deliberate. This was because there was no one else willing to do it. Go ahead, Angelo.
Yeah, I just want to add something. Who is actually fighting the Russian people in Donbass? They picked Azov battalion. Why? Because they have this hatred against Russians. Because what will happen is that you couldn't have regular troops, Ukrainian troops, to fire on their fellow Ukrainians citizens. I mean, you wouldn't have that. So this is why they got Azov battalion, and this is in the zone right now in Mariupol. You know, they're all encircled. By the way, Azov battalion at this moment they're all encircled, and they're being defeated. But they are the most fierce because you know they have this hate against Russian, and they choose the Azov battalion to bomb, to shell the Donbas region for the last 8 years.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Let's go to the map. Yes, I can hear you.
So
let's
you
go
can
to the
see
map here.
that the Mariupol is the zone in
This white.
blue. Yeah, and
Yeah,
you have
right down here.
yeah, and you have this zone in blue. This is you have a large army there, Ukrainian army, which is being encircled. So you see, they're going from both sides, from the north and from the south, and basically they should surrender. Why are we keeping on like this? I mean, now there's going to be a catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe. You know, millions of people will have to leave. This is the time that Zelensky, if he cares about his people, to say, well, I surrender and prepare for peace. Because it's getting worse day by day, you know. And my expectation, the way I see it, I wouldn't be surprised that Zelensky is going to be the next Juan Guaido. That if there is a new government in Ukraine, which is going to be more balanced, then they are going to have this US puppet that is Zelensky that is going to run this government in exile from the US or from London.
Yeah, exactly. So you had the forces from Donbas link up with Russian forces coming in out of Crimea, Russian Crimea, and they have completely surrounded the city here on the coast. They have taken over the entire coast, basically. And now they're pushing up. Kiev has a column of Russian military vehicles 4 miles long, or around 6 kilometers, 6.5 kilometers long, coming out of Belarus to Kiev. And they have not moved, and they're not moving because they can't. They're not moving, and we're going to get into this right now for another reason. And you hear about, Ukraine, they're still in the fight. They still got air power. Let's get them some more jets. If they had air power, they would have hit that column, and they haven't because they can't. That's a plain fact. This force right here, this in blue, just like Angelo said, they are in the process of being encircled. It might be because they just tactically they cannot uproot and withdraw as fast as they need to escape this. So why don't we go to what the main point of this video was, to go over this pro-NATO analysis. This was done on day 4 of the operations. We're on day 9. So they were saying, interpreting the first few days of the Russo-Ukrainian war on the rocks. These are warmongers, pro-NATO. They want Ukraine to win, and they were almost crying because they realized that Ukraine has 0% chance of stopping Russia, barring a total NATO intervention. They cannot stop Russia. And it's audio, and the link to this is in the video description. And I suggest that anyone who has any knowledge about tactics and operational overviews listen to this. This is pro-NATO saying this. So I've got some notes. And Angelo, when you heard this, what was your take? I'm going to go through it point by point, but why don't you give me your take? And before that, this was the expert that they were interviewing, Michael Kofman. He was born in Ukraine, and he is definitely like part of the establishment, the Western defense establishment. Go ahead, Angelo.
Well, they're very surprised about the restraint of Russian troops. You know, actually, in practice, Russia could actually have no death on their side and just carpet bomb. If they were using NATO's tactics, strategies, just carpet bombing, and you just no discrimination between civilian population and army forces. So here, it's clearly why they're going so slowly and being very careful. It's because they want to protect the civilian population. Keep in mind, they don't want to have the civilians. I mean, if there are a lot of civilian casualties, then how are you going to prepare for peace? I think Russia is already a few steps ahead. They're like, okay, we need to take over, demilitarize, denazify, and somehow just have a minimum damage in terms of civilian casualties, so we can prepare for peace. Because if there are massive casualties, then it's going to be difficult. You are going to have the Ukrainian population going against Russia, and it's no good. You need to prepare for peace already.
Absolutely, Angela. That was one of the main takeaways from this discussion. Maybe I'll just leave it up on the screen so people joining us can see what we're talking about. We're talking about this pro-NATO, pro-US, pro-Ukrainian analysis done by these establishment experts in the West about Ukraine's situation. So yes, they were very confused about why Russia didn't just carpet bomb them and take Kiev. They probably could have done it in 48 hours if they wanted to. So 48 hours, what they tried to do, what Russia tried to do as a first and what would have been the best option, but not the most realistic option, was it within 48 hours try to kind of psych Ukraine into collapsing and surrendering to minimize the loss of life on both sides. But that did not work. So what have they done? They have a fraction, a small fraction. Angela, I think you said 10%. I don't know where you got that number.
But between 10 to 20%, yeah,
very small tiny fraction of Russia's forces are in Ukraine. And what they're trying to do is use the most minimum amount of force to accomplish the things that they're trying to accomplish without using anything excessive of that. That is what they're doing right now. So when they meet resistance, they'll trickle some more forces and they'll use a little bit more air power. But they will not go in full force, because that is exactly what, and this is pro-NATO analysts saying this, they're trying to minimize civilian deaths and damage to Ukraine's infrastructure. So waging war in a completely different way than the West does. When the US went into Iraq, they steamrolled over everything. They flattened everything in their way. They killed everything in their way, all the way to Baghdad. And it still took them like weeks to get to Baghdad and take Baghdad. So Russia is doing something completely different here. What you're seeing on social media when you see Russian vehicles destroyed or Russian soldiers captured, this is because they're not sending in their main force. They are sending in these small detachments. They're breaking up to take over junctures, intersections, strategic points, and then they get ambushed by Ukrainian forces. And what these NATO analysts, pro-NATO analysts, said was that what you're seeing on social media are vignettes, tactical vignettes, that are not giving you an operational overview. In operational overview, this is them saying it, not me. They are losing. Ukraine is losing. They have no way of winning. These tactical vignettes are purely war propaganda. This is to make it look like Ukraine somehow has a chance, to keep people irrationally invested in this war, just like you said, Angela, to maximize the West's goal for Ukraine is exactly the opposite of Russia, to maximize civilian deaths, to maximize infrastructure destruction. This is what NATO is trying to do versus what Russia is trying to do. Let's see what else I got. And Angela, anytime you want to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I want to say something which is really important in terms of criminal activities. What they're doing here right now in Donbass, they want to keep the population. They don't want the population to leave. So you have what we call the Ukro-Nazis, so the Nazis that are actually controlling the area. They're actually shooting at civilians that are trying to leave. But besides that, there's something really important, and that this cannot be discussed in terms of, I mean, you can verify. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, they say, we are not, from now on, we're not going to take prisoner of war. So we are going to kill them. And this is going against, I mean, this is crimes against humanity. I mean, it goes against the Geneva Convention. And it's opening, it was on a Facebook, post. It's there. Yeah. It's there. They cannot deny it. So they're calling the military just not to make any prisoners, just kill them. So you see, the thing is that we need to pay attention. There's lots of misinformation. We are trying to be, we might say some things that might not be very accurate, but I think the most important is that we're using, most of the information we're using is actually coming from Western media. Because otherwise, if we're taking RT, we might be taken as propagandists, And again, my position, your position, I'm talking for the both of us. We are anti-war. What happens is that we need to explain to people that this war didn't start 10 days ago. It is important to understand that this war started in 2014. Give the whole picture. It's about really giving the whole picture. At the end of the day, people they can decide for themselves, but at least Just tell the people, because we see that 95% of people, they don't realize that war has been going on for 8 years. 14,000 people died. So it is important to give out this information. 2 million people, they were living in basement, in cellars for the last 8 years. So if you care about human rights and you're anti-war, well, we'll talk about this too.
Yeah, absolutely. And hold on a second. These, if I see trolls, I'm just getting rid of them. I don't care. I don't really care at all. Seriously, you go to Fox News, go to MSNBC with that. They'll be more than happy to welcome you into this mindless cult foaming at the mouth for war with Russia. So yeah, exactly. There was a war going on already. Russia is trying to stop it, just like there was a war going on already in Syria when Russia went in to stop it. And they did. They saved Syria from the same fate as Libya, because as bad as Syria was, if the U.S. got its way and collapsed the government in Damascus, there would have been genocide, there would have been destruction, there would have been even millions more displaced than already were. And Russia stopped that. That they stopped something that the U.S. deliberately was doing to Syria and had already done to Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other countries that they've been bombing all across Africa and the Middle East, Yemen. Don't forget about Yemen and Central Asia. So let's get back to this right here. This analysis by pro-NATO voices. They're talking about Ukraine. Their actual resistance is futile. They will not stop Russia's forces. There's absolutely no way. They're like I said, they're throwing everything they have at these isolated units, these Russian units that end up isolated from the main force. That's what they're doing. That's these victories that they're getting, is fighting isolated forces. There's no way they will defeat Russia's main force. They have said that Russia has not committed its full air power, and I'm not talking about their full air power in total. What was allotted for this operation is sitting on the ground outside of Ukraine. They have not committed it yet. At any time they decide to, they can, and it'll immediately have an impact on the battlefield. Ukrainian air power cannot reach the main body of Russia's forces. They cannot. If they could, they would. They're being shot down. Russia's air defense is successful. This is pro-NATO analysts saying this. And so what is Russia doing? What did they predict Russia would do at day 4 when this right here, this talk, they had this talk? They predicted that Russia would adjust and start sending in more and more forces to get what they wanted on the battlefield, these objectives they were after. And that's what they did. And so by day 8, Kherson, the city Kherson in southern Ukraine, that was taken by Russian forces. The whole coast has been taken by Russian forces. So obviously, they're making progress. Let's see. So we already talked about what we're seeing on social media. Ukraine is showing all of these victories on social media. These are tactical vignettes of victory among an actual operational overview of complete failure and a 0% chance of succeeding. And they said that the Ukrainian forces and the government will not withstand this. It's up to Russia ultimately what happens. Now the info war. I thought this was very interesting. They said Ukraine and because the West is helping them, Ukraine and the West are winning the information war. This is undoubtable. And again, the West is just closing down anyone who is opposing. I mean, we're just waiting for them to shut down my channel and to deplatform me and take away my means of financial support. That's what I'm waiting for. They've already gotten rid of RT. It's gone. They've just been taking it down. RT America is done. Hundreds of people are out of jobs now. And again, this is the West. They're saying they're the good guys. They stand for freedom in the world, and yet the mask has fallen off, and you could see exactly what they're really about. But the info war, they admit, again, these are pro-NATO analysts admit that what Ukraine is saying is just complete lies, to take everything they say with a bucket of salt, not a pinch of salt, a bucket of salt. That was his words, not mine. And what they're trying to do is create time and space. That's what Ukraine's trying to do, create time and space for NATO to do something. But we have to remember that even though you win the information war, it still depends entirely on your ground game. If you have a good ground game and you win the information war, then there's something you can do with that. If you have no ground game, if Ukrainian forces have 0% chance of stopping Russia, then you won the information war, so what? They won the information war in Syria also, but it made absolutely no difference. So the US is very good at lying and misleading people. They've done it over and over again. Weapons of mass destruction, incubator babies, Viagra rape squads, you name it. But if their game on the ground is insufficient, then it makes no difference. Let's see, what else is there? Yeah, and this, I thought this was funny. They admit that all of this talk about Russia's, information warfare, disinformation, their ability to like pull the strings of everyone on earth, this was always a lie. This was always a lie to discredit anyone opposing the US and its foreign policy, because right now, where is Russia's disinformation operation? It's nowhere to be found. When the US really wanted to shut it down, they did. And let's see. Okay, and then they talked about the scenarios. This is the last part. They talked about the scenarios. And if you're just joining us, I'm talking about this war on the rocks. These are pro-NATO analysts. It's a discussion, an audio file here. They're talking about they're taking over these small towns. They're trying to avoid the cities. If they can get the government and the military to collapse before having to work on the big cities, that is preferable, again, to save lives and to save infrastructure. This is Russia's objective, first and foremost. They're sacrificing brave Russian lives to save Ukrainian civilians. This is what they're doing. This is pro-NATO analysts admitting this. Yeah, and we talked about the coast. We talked about the encirclement. And we talked about the 6.4 kilometer long column coming out of Belarus, waiting to work on Kiev. And so the Russian air power is not being used for political reasons to minimize the loss of life, civilian life. And they noted that there's plenty of opportunities for Russians to kill civilians, and they're not. If a Ukrainian civilian stands in front of a tank, the tank will stop. They're not running over Ukrainians. They're not machine gunning them like the U.S. did in Iraq or Syria or everywhere else they've gone. And I got a couple of more things here. Angelo, you want to jump in?
Well, you see, we've been lied over and over many times. What shocks me really is that people, even though they've been lied all along, I mean, so many times, and they still fall into the trap. Additional to that, what is extremely scary is we are into a scenario where you have this cancel culture. Now, alternative voices are completely shut down. I mean, on a day-to-day basis. You've seen like this teacher in the US, he was actually telling his students to keep a critical mind, and he was expelled. He was expelled. Yeah. He was not even taking a pro-Russia side. He was saying, well, this is the news, but try to have a critical mind and to think there are two sides. It's never white or black. And that's what worries me. It's people are binary. It's like you are pro-Putin. That's the answer we got. And they don't have, average Joe doesn't have this critical mind. It is so shocking. And I think if you look at how the West is shaping the mind of people, it starts from Hollywood. Just analyze, like you see Netflix movies, all the last movies in the last 20 years. How did they picture Russians? They picture Russians as mafia, rough, no culture, or if they are women, they are prostitutes. I mean, you see, this is what is in the subconscious mind of people. And then it's when they see Putin, it's like, oh, of course, he's Russian. And this whole association. And it's very sad. I mean, this is a scenario that, we've seen it all along. It's the book of Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent. Slowly how you get into the subconscious mind of people. And again, it is important just to see, well, Ukraine didn't happen this last 10 days. It happened long time before. But most important is to see the long-term game. Once you see the long-term game, everything makes sense. What they're doing in Ukraine and what they are starting to do in Taiwan. And that's all about U.S. hegemony. And there's this war behind that. There's the war on the US dollar currency hegemony. And I think the US is extremely angry. The West This is a humiliation here, because it's stopping the plan, the long-term plans, just of global hegemony. So this is the first time since World War II that you have a single country, they say, well, stop, I'm not going to accept that you bully us. How many times, how many wars since World War II where countries were destroyed? Name it, Vietnam, Yemen, so many countries, and it's always double standards. I don't want to minimize what is happening in Ukraine, but the war on terror, 1 million people died. Here in Ukraine, we might have, altogether between Donbass and now, maybe 20,000 people will die. And actually, we are going to stop a war. But it's this double standard, really. And people, sometimes I think they're trying to, you see this association also that, those people are people like you and I, meaning they're white people. They are not people from Afghanistan, because people from Afghanistan, for those guys, they're not lives. I mean, they would actually care more about getting the dogs, the dogs in Afghanistan out, but Afghanistan there, we destroyed that country. 20 years of destruction, trillions of dollars spent. I mean, people, if in the US, if you are angry at Ukraine, it's just absurd. Why don't you are angry at all the wars that US taxpayers, paid for? And the millions of life, destroyed. Remember Albright, when they asked her, there's 500,000 kids that died in this war on terror. Do you think it was worth? And she does say yes.
Yeah, she says it was. She says it was worth it. We think it was worth it. About 500,000 kids starved to death, or denied medical care and dying because the U.S. wanted to eliminate Iraq and lied about nuclear weapons and chemical weapons they knew Iraq didn't have. It was worth it to kill 500,000 kids. And then the audacity of people in the U.S. government now to call Putin a child killer, ignoring the fact that the U.S. This is what the U.S. has been doing, and this is not whataboutism, because what Russia is doing right now is ending a war that was already going on, just like in Syria. They didn't go in there and just start killing people in Syria. There was already a war going on. They were trying to stop something even more catastrophic than what was happening. And they did. And they saved countless lives doing that. And that is what's happening in Ukraine, because if they didn't stop this in Ukraine and it ended up somehow in Russia, again, remember, Russia fought 2 wars. Chechen wars inside their borders. This was sponsored by the U.S. And I have a whole section in the video description below about, because some people have asked me, what is your evidence that the U.S. Was behind that? As a matter of fact, I think, hold on a second. This is so funny. This is Russia Matters. So this is like an anti-Russia U.S. propaganda website that just everything Russia does is bad. And it says, claim. In 2004, 2015, and 2017, the U.S. government supported Chechen separatism. Partially correct. This is U.S. propaganda saying it's partially correct. So how much worse must it actually be in reality? And in the video description below, I have articles that I've written. Don't take my word for it. Look at what I cited and look at those sources. And you will see that the U.S. was doing in Chechnya, inside of Russia's borders, what they were doing in Syria, arming and funding ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the worst elements in the world, to kill Russians and to carve their country up. And this is what Russia has been facing for decades, since the fall of the Soviet Union. This is what they're reacting to. This is self-preservation. Now, I want to get back. I want to finish this, and then we can see where the discussion goes from here. So if you're just joining us, I'm doing this breakdown on this conversation they had at War on the Rocks. This is pro-Western, pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian. And they're basically concluding that Ukraine has 0% chance of stopping Russia. There's no way they can do it. And everything that you're seeing in the media, this is them admitting this. It's just war propaganda. It's tactical vignettes of victory amongst operational failure. And it just makes sense. I mean, Russia just has such a much larger military than Ukraine. It's a no-brainer, really. Now, they were also talking toward the end of this podcast. It's not that long, actually. It's like 25 minutes. They're talking about Western military support. And again, this is what Angelo was talking about at the beginning. The West is trying to bleed Russia and fight them to the last Ukrainian, to just bleed Russia as much as possible. So that if their dream scenario is to kill off every single Ukrainian and bleed every Russian soldier to the last drop, that's what they're going for. So you got Germany sending weapons to Ukraine. This is a government knowingly employing Nazis within their official armed forces. This is Germany arming them. They said things like aircraft and heavy equipment is just, there's no way. It is just going to get immediately destroyed. There's no way Russia is going to allow that. They also admitted, that, again, this is pro-NATO analysts, admitting that there are no pilots just waiting around for NATO to send them jets. They don't have the pilots. So this idea of sending jets is just ludicrous. And that was day 4. We're at day 9 now. So it's only gotten worse for Ukraine. They're talking about these anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft missiles. They flooded Syria with these things to the max. I mean, every single one that they could find and send to Syria, they did. The ISIS and Al-Qaeda brigades out there fighting, they had so many anti-tank missiles that if they just saw a guy walking, they would just use a anti-tank missile. That's how many they had, and it still made no difference on the ground. Again, you've got this force that just they don't have air superiority. They cannot control the air, and they're going to lose. It's as simple as that. Let's see, what else? Okay, now let's just, I think that's it. Oh yeah, one more thing to be on the lookout, and this is me adding this on to this, what they were talking about. And again, the link for this will be in the video description below. They might say they're sending aircraft to Ukraine and pretend that it's Ukrainian pilots flying them, but it might be NATO pilots flying planes over Ukraine, because they did things like that during the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So we just got to keep an eye open for that. The idea that all these people are going to sign up and go join the Ukraine army, like there's 3 Thai protesters here that were part of the US-backed protest here. They say they're going to Ukraine to go join the army there, which, you know, it's just sad how brainwashed these people are. They're gonna die. It's a one-way trip if they go to Ukraine. Something else we have to keep an eye out is for the buffer zone. This is what they did in Syria. This is how they grabbed territory permanently in Syria, using these buffer zones. They might try to set up a buffer zone in Western Ukraine. And other than that, I think that's it. I don't think NATO can do anything short of starting a direct war with Russia. There's nothing they can do to save Ukraine. It's over for Ukraine. It's just a matter of how stubborn they are and how many of their own lives, civilian lives and civilian infrastructure, they feel like sacrificing to save a regime that ultimately answers to Washington, not to the Ukrainian people. Since 2014, that is sad. Angela, anything you want to add to that?
I would say that short term for the US, this is mission accomplished. I'm going to explain why. What was the purpose to create this Ukraine scenario? The US wanted to create, the kind of similar to the Afghanistan trap. They want Russia to be into the same situation that the US was in Afghanistan. You get into this war that doesn't end. So it's lots of resources that are used by Russia. Then what happens is that they wanted to decouple Russian economy with the EU. So what happens is that if you're integrated in the with the economies, then you don't go to war. So it was an amazing move in terms of strategy. So you decouple Europe economy with Russia. You try to isolate Russia. And what they want to do, the ultimate goal is, once you have sanctions, the economy goes down, people are going to get nervous, and they're hoping for regime change. But this never succeeded. If you look at what happened in Iran, if what happened in Cuba, I mean, how many years they've been under sanctions? If you look at Venezuela, well, it doesn't happen, but it is still the hope of the US. Regime change in Russia, weaken Russia. What happens is that Russia, what it is going to lose through the business with Europe is going to gain it to tilting towards Asia. And I think China has the capacity to buy whatever is lost with the European market. China will do it. And I'm expecting the next step is, because China is helping Russia, China will be sanctioned for that.
Let me unmute my mic. Yeah. And again, it's really important to point out that not only is the U.S. doing this with Russia right now, but this is, I just read an incredibly excellent article that should be coming out soon. they are referring to Ukraine as a stepping stone used by the US to then antagonize China, to draw China into some sort of armed conflict. And let me explain. According to the Rand Corporation's paper from, I think it was, what was it, 2016, and they said that 2025 is the close-off date, when the window is finally closed. And I think it probably is already, it's going to close sooner than that if the U.S. is not successful. Yeah, we got some good questions coming in too, so we're gonna get.
Yeah, let's check.
That.
We can check also the questions. Good idea. Yeah.
I also have someone ask about contributing. I prefer people use Buy Me a Coffee because my thing can get my platforms can get zapped at any moment. If you use Buy Me a Coffee, I can take the money out of that where they can't grab it. If you use Patreon, that's month to month, and then if they take that, I'm just done. I'm toast. So I'm trying to figure out an alternative, and everyone in alternative media needs to start thinking about this, because this is at the end of the line, and I've never seen the West this desperate. It was not this bad even after 9/11. It was not this bad. This is the worst I've ever seen it, and I've been following this for a long time. I don't know, Angela, if you've seen a time where the West was just more ridiculous than now.
It is extreme. You know, I'm just going to give you some examples. In Czechia, they are actually threatening people to put them in jail for what they've put. You know, basically, I mean, they were putting, like, on social media, they was putting some posts like pro-Russia. Well, they are going to sanction those people. I mean, you know, threatening them to jail time. But the thing is that you issue the law, and then if people break the law, then you put them to jail. No, in Czechia, what they want to do is just go back to, okay, who's posted like pro-Russia post, and put them in jail. And this is where we're going. There's going to be self-censorship. I'm doing self-censorship on my Facebook account. I've deleted all the posts that were balanced, you know, like covering Ukraine. And slowly, our voices are going to be shut down because it's inconvenient. And the same people are actually talking about freedom of speech and democracy. It's just pure hypocrisy. People need to keep a critical mind, really. What we're doing here, we're just hoping that people just dig, find more information. But the sad thing is that because we are entering into a war, we won't be able to do that. I mean, personally, if I'm still in Europe, now in Switzerland, if I was in Italy, I think if it goes into this direction and we are going to confrontation, NATO against Russia, they won't allow decent voices. That's the sad reality. So this is maybe the last moment that we can still talk. Brian, your microphone is put your microphone on, Brian.
Sorry. Yeah, I did that. I keep doing that. Okay, yeah. Sorry. I have an alternative channel. It's still under Land Destroyer. It's on Odyssey. So I put the link in. I think it's in the video description. Should be, and I just put it in the chat. So check that out. Follow that. You could follow that. It automatically backs up all of my videos on YouTube over to Odyssey. I have a website that this is newatlas.report. If I get kicked off of YouTube, then just go here, bookmark this, and just go here. And wherever I can put up a video, I will embed it on this website. So you'll still be able to get my work that way. Now, let's see. We have some questions here. I want to get to some of these questions. Mm-hmm. Will Russia take the moral high ground and not retaliate and ban Western media? They should ban Western media. It's not media. It's propaganda. It's in their country. They've already had all of their media silenced. For what reason should they allow the West have access to the Russian population? And Russia, they did that, but only after the West did that. So it's just funny how the West is always about free speech, and how when Russia did it, it was actually in retaliation for the West doing it first. About the Minsk agreement, yeah, I think once this is all done, the Minsk agreement will obviously, I don't even think it'll be necessary, because whatever the government in the breakaway republics are going to be recognized and left alone. That will be a thing. Are Chechen special forces engaged already in Ukraine? I know they're in Ukraine right now. I don't know what they're doing there. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. If there's I think it's called Intel Slavzi. If you search for that on Telegram, they have a lot of updates. But be warned, they will show you the reality of war. And if you don't have the stomach for that, don't look at it. And I don't think less of you if you can't. I understand how serious it is and how some people have issues with that. So, but just be forewarned. Let's see some other questions. Do you give a chance that Ukraine becomes a quagmire for Russia, like Clinton said? I don't know if it's going to become a quagmire. Think about Syria. Everything that the U.S. is going to do in Ukraine, they already tried in Syria. Russia is not going to be blindsided by any of this, and I think it'll be a lot like Syria. It will never be calm and totally okay, but I think they will be able to carve out some safe spots in Ukraine where people can get back to living normal lives. Will you guys cover the UNHCR debate that is happening right now? I don't know. I usually don't pay attention to.
It's a lot of work. No, it is a lot of work. This is. I think it's better to have a higher view. This is the same as. It makes me think about the tribunal, Xinjiang Uyghur tribunal. Keep in mind that there are some organizations that politically the US are much stronger. So to give you an example, the Olympic Committee, they're banning Belarusian and Russian. I mean, are we going to cover that? No, I think we are in full war now. Sanctions everywhere. You have lots of brands that are coming out from Russia. I mean, we are in complete decoupling. We've seen the decoupling starting with China. Remember, with China banning Huawei and many companies under the pretext of national security. This was the beginning. So what I'm seeing here is a general decoupling for both, the blocks. You have massive blocks, Eurasia, from Central Asia, Asia, and then you have the West, and that's the first step. And once you completely decouple, then there's a potential for war there, because you're dependent. If you go to war, when you have integrated economies, you are mutual destruction. There's one thing I want to add, that Russia has been prepared for that. For the last 8 years, it has built an economy which is extremely self-sufficient. Russia is one of the unique countries in the world that is completely self-sufficient. There's everything, and it has re-industrialized itself. It has built up a war chest. I mean, more than $600 billion of reserve. So well, it's going to suffer. The sanctions, Russia is going to suffer. But you know who's going to suffer? EU, and because the EU, they're not going to buy oil and gas from Russia, but they're going to buy gas and oil from the US, much more expensive. And this is going to make the US, actually, they're going to make lots of money out of this.
Angela, can I ask you a question? Do you think Russia is going to turn the gas off to Europe? Because it's still flowing right now.
This is what we call the neutral solution. I mean, this is the last, extremely the last. This is, I think, the only conditions that they will shut down the gas is that if NATO is going against Russia. I mean, if you cross that line, you're at war. But keep in mind, even during the Cold War, that Russia, the USSR, always respected this, because it's so essential. Once you cut that, then you lose complete credibility, because building a pipeline, it's billions of dollars, and it's a commitment really, of it's 50 years of trade. If you break that, you're not credible. Not only for the NATO countries and EU, but you're not credible also for other partners, India and so on. They're like, well, so essential, because there's no more essential than that. You stop gas and oil, you destroy economies. And right now, if Russia was to do that right now, the EU would completely collapse, because there's no alternative. Keep in mind, they could buy liquefied gas, but you need an economy that actually can take liquefied gas. Right now, the excess, if Russia was to stop supplying gas, there is no one in the world that can supply what the EU needs. So even Qatar and the US could not supply that, and it would be massive. They wouldn't do that. Would be a war
So
declaration.
yeah, be on the lookout for that. If that were to happen, that would be like, that is uncharted waters. Like you said, even in the Cold War, the Soviet Union kept the gas flowing no matter how high the tensions got. So let's keep an eye on that. Let's see, is China a valid NATO target now? I don't know about what the word valid means, but China has always been the prime target. Russia is a stepping stone to encircling, containing, isolating China, destroying it, collapsing it economically, and putting it in its place under rich white countries. They will not accept a non-white nation surpassing them. And they've said it in their policy papers for decades. Since the Vietnam War, they had policy papers that you could read on the State Department's official website, where they say they are going to encircle and contain China. They're not going to allow it to surpass the U.S. Let's keep going down.
Yeah,
go ahead, Angela. I'm going to look for more questions.
Something that we keep on repeating. People, I know that there's lots of people, even in the global south, the anti-Russian, anti-Chinese. Keep in mind one thing which is extremely important. This is not about containing only Russia and China. The end goal is to contain the whole global south. If Russia and China were to fall, the whole global south, South America, Africa, all Asia would be completely contained. The economies would suffer. It's important for people. So just go back to World War II. What happened in World War II was the conflict was in Europe, and the US was standing by and was selling weapons. And it was actually the trade. It became the biggest export in the world. It amassed vast reserve of gold back then, while Europe was fighting and tens of millions of people were dying. This is what is happening right now. The US is going to see Europe fighting Russia and standing by and selling trillions of dollars of weapons, while also selling extremely expensive oil and gas. Who's going to suffer?
Yeah,
EU is going to. It's perfect. Yeah. And the EU didn't see that. I think they did see that, but at some point, EU was a CIA US initiative, was to better control Europe. So you need to look at NATO as being the weapon, the arms, defense, and EU is the political side. But they are the same. They are in reality the same. We sold to Europeans the fact that EU is going to be an integration because we didn't want to have any more wars. We did have wars. People forget that Yugoslavia, 70 days of bombing of Yugoslavia. How about the sovereignty of Yugoslavia? It was all fake news. And now you want to blame Russia while it's an existential threat. What happened in Ukraine was existential threat. Yugoslavia, where were you? And this was a European conflict. And it's not ended. In Yugoslavia, the war is not ended. There are lots of tensions between Serbia and all the neighbors. It's not over yet.
Yeah. People forget that. They forget everything. You see some of these people on Twitter, just average people on Twitter, talking about how we've never seen anything like this amount of death and destruction since World War II. It's like, what are you talking about? This is all the US has done all around the globe since World War II. I'm going to keep going down the questions, and hopefully we'll get to the end. And once we get to the end, because I'm scrolling down, and then maybe we end it because we're coming up to 1 hour. This is South Korea. Someone asked, when are we doing videos about South Korea? This is the trade South Korea does. Their number one import and export partner is China. So it's just a reality. Money is power, and China dominates trade. This is why the US is so desperate. Courting with World War III to try to stop China, because it dominates trade. It dominates the progress of humanity and the rising up of all of these nations that have been subjugated for generations by Western imperialism. These nations are all rising up. They're getting infrastructure, technology, prosperity, and the US wants to put a stake through the heart of China. This is what this is all leading up to. Yeah, people are talking about Patrick Lancaster. He is in a war zone. He is an American in Donbas for the last 8 years in Donbas and Crimea, covering it, trying to get the word out because no one was covering it. Just like people keep saying, you're upset about Ukraine right now. Where were you for the last 8 years when the literal Nazis were shelling families in Donbas? Where were you? You were nowhere because the TV didn't tell you to have any feelings on it. Now the TV's telling you to have an opinion, and now you have an opinion. The same people I told you there were WMDs in Iraq. It's crazy. The refugee crisis, yeah. People forget over the last 8 years, millions of people have left Ukraine. Over 2 million left because Crimea rejoined Russia.
And they went to Russia. The 2 million refugees went to Russia. Did you cry about those refugees that left home? And they left for 8 years. 8 years. You see those refugees that you see now going to Europe. You know what? If everything goes well, maybe in a few weeks, months, they'll be back. You have refugees that left in 2014, 15, 2 million. Where did they go? They went to Russia. And there's also millions of people that left for EU. And you know what? They contributed to be cheap labor, if not slave labor, to the EU. But what is it for Ukraine? Was it good for Ukraine? No. You know, Ukraine, the economy of Ukraine is worse than what it was in the 1990s. It's even poorer than Moldova. You know, Ukraine, the GDP per capita is at the level of African countries. Egypt is at the same level as Egypt. Look at how poor is Egypt.
Yeah. People don't really realize this. I like to point this out every opportunity. Before 2014, before the US overthrew the government in Ukraine and Ukraine ceased to be a sovereign country, Russia did not invade a sovereign country. It's liberating a captured country, captured by the US. Before 2014, Thailand made a major arms deal with the government of Ukraine, buying main battle tanks from Ukraine to replace their old US main battle tanks. They did not want to buy more American tanks. And so they made the deal with Ukraine. And then 2014 happened. The order wasn't even close to being fulfilled. And it couldn't be fulfilled because the government ran, the client regime the US installed into power ran the entire country into the ground. This was one of the major things that Ukraine did. They made aircraft, they made weapons. They could not deliver. So Thailand had to go to China and get VT4, like scores of VT4 tanks from China instead of from Ukraine, because China could deliver, Ukraine could not. And then there was also the Antonov aircraft. This is like the largest cargo planes in the world. They had not made a plane since 2014. So it's essentially dead because they were doing a lot of cooperation with Russia. Even they had like aerospace industry in Ukraine that has not done any work because the US took over, put a puppet regime into power that irrationally cut ties with Russia, and everything that they were cooperating with Russia ended, which means all of these heavy industries that Ukraine was involved in ended because they did all of that cooperation with Russia. Angelo, you could... I'm going to look for more questions.
Another example, China actually wanted to buy some, companies making planes. I mean, just some high-tech companies from Ukraine because it was going bankrupt. The US actually put pressure on Ukraine, and ultimately, so it couldn't sell to China. But ultimately, this company went bankrupt. So you see, in terms of containment, it's just like, and again, Ukraine. I mean, look at geography. And look at the trade. The trade that Ukraine is doing with the US is marginal. So it's not going to affect. It's not going to affect the US. And also, like decoupling Russia and the US and EU. Is it affected the US? No. You know what is the trade between Russia and the US in 2019? 2% in both export and import. Actually, you could. Why don't you take? Brian,
yeah.
Can you take the Atlas Economic Complexity? You can see, this is the graph, Russia, and we can check export and import by partners. How much is it in terms of export? 4%. And probably the export, people don't know, but randomly, Russia sells oil to the US. I mean, this, just because sometimes they use Russia as a buffer. But here, import of Russia, it's only 2.5% of total import. So you see, this is factual, and this comes from Harvard University.
Yes. That's correct. And I mean, who's going to lose out the most? Europe. Exactly
Europe.
what you said, Angelo. It's like World War II. Everyone destroyed themselves. U.S. was this island of stability and industry, and they were then at America's mercy. And this is what the U.S. is trying to do: is trying to burn Eurasia to the ground, so it's the last man standing, and it gets to rebuild everything in its own demented, psychotic image. Someone asked about NATO getting involved, NATO establishing a no-fly zone. There's a reason why the U.S. and Israel, when they shoot missiles at something in Syria, they do it from like Lebanon or from Iraq. It's because they're worried about even Syria's older air defense systems. And people don't realize this, but I do not believe that Russia has used their latest air defense systems in combat yet. And the reason they haven't done that is because the minute they do, you will be able to gather a lot of information about how it works and how to circumvent it. So they've kind of saved the best for last. And there's no guarantee that if NATO gets involved in a no-fly zone over Ukraine, that they're going to be able to establish it. And one thing that the West has going for it, kind of, sort of, is this idea of their military invincibility. If you have never seen, or it has been a really long time before you've seen significant numbers of Western aircraft fall from the sky or Western ships sink to the bottom of the ocean. It's been a long time since that's happened. The minute that happens, that veneer of invincibility falls away and you can never get it back. This is what happened to the Roman Empire. This is what happened to the British Empire. This sort of a humiliating defeat at the hand of someone else after, years, decades, sometimes generations of military superiority. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, I'd like to add something. I think people should start to look out for proxy wars. From now on, the gloves are off, and you could expect proxy wars around the world, where you have Russian interests that are going against the EU and US interests. We saw it in Mali. In Mali, you had the French actually leaving Mali. They were expelled by the people because the people are tired of colonialism, the presence of a French army. And they were welcoming the Russians. So now I would expect if NATO is not going against Russia in Ukraine, and they won't, because this would be a declaration of war and maybe a World War III, I would expect more that the gloves are off and you could have proxy wars around the world between Russia and Western interests, and maybe also China. I don't know how willing is China is to get dirty. I think it's too early now. They wouldn't do that. But at some point, I would expect that later on, we could have the same as we had during World War II, proxy wars around the world. And maybe they're going to help like decolonization. I'll give you an example. China, the position when it came to the Malvinas Island, the Falkland Islands, they're taking sides with Argentina against the UK. So now we could expect some proxy wars. They're going to influence some countries around the world that are being still colonized, new form of colonization, so it's instability. The world is going to be unstable. It's not going to be only Ukraine. It's going to be all the global South. This through proxy wars.
Absolutely. We were talking about the Solomon Islands and how they turned on Taiwan, this fake country that does not exist, and how the U.S. tried to burn them to the ground and how China helped them. And so, we're going to see a lot of this. I saw someone also ask about Ukraine. Where's Ukraine's air defense? They're destroyed. And whatever's left is not significant enough to stop Russian air power. When these 200 Stingers go into action, will it have an impact on the battlefield? Yes, but they did the same thing in Syria. Russia has experience dealing with this. This is not something that's going to stop. And like I said, even pro-NATO analysts admit that Russian air power, for the most part, what was allotted for this operation is still on the ground on the other side of the border. They have not used it. And if they don't have to, they don't want to use it. And there's a possibility that they can win this war without ever having to use it, keeping it in reserve just in case NATO does try to do a no-fly zone, which that will be World War III. This, again, Angelo, you said it, I've said it, it's existential for Russia. This is their survival. They are fighting for their survival. This is not a war of choice. This isn't, I've seen these aloof leftists on Twitter talking about this is Russian imperialism. It's so absurd when you look at what NATO has done. Look at NATO on a world map. Look at how they went like a swarm of locusts from one country to the next, like a horde, like a swarm of locusts coming right up to Russia's border. What do you think they're going to do next? Doesn't take a strategic genius to figure out where they're going next. They're going into Russia. And so this is about Russia saving themselves as a nation, as a people. Let's see. I think that's it for questions. We're over an hour. Angela, you have any last thoughts before I wrap up?
Well, last thought, if people really cared about Ukraine, if you care about Ukraine, you don't sell Ukraine weapons, especially when it's actually losing. It's going to lose. Why don't you keep on selling weapons and keep on antagonizing people? Ukraine now should surrender, and we should aim at peace. That if you are for peace, otherwise, you know what the Europe and the US could do? Humanitarian aid. You want to help Ukrainians? Humanitarian aid. That's what you should do.
Tell Zelensky to surrender.
Yeah.
Tell Zelensky and the military to surrender. Tell them to hand over the Nazis, and go back to the table and hammer out accepting. And just think about what this puppet regime in Kiev has done over the last 8 years. How Ukraine as a country has shrunk because of their misleadership and their belligerence at the behest of Washington. How they have bled the country of literal blood, economically, of territory. This is what happens when you get into bed with the U.S. You never come back out, yet not alive. What was that? There was this famous quote that I think it was Kissinger. Was it Kissinger? Somebody said it was like, it's terrible to be America's enemy. It's fatal to be its ally. Something like that. This is Ukraine. Another example is Ukraine. Yeah. Most recent example. Azov. Someone said Azov won't surrender easily. Probably, but. Probably, but then again, do you want them? It would be nice if you could de-radicalize them, like China has done, extremists. But if they don't, then they don't. So let's just wrap up here. Yep. The main topic today was this. This is pro-NATO analysis of the ongoing operations in Ukraine. They're pro-NATO. They're pro-Ukraine. They want Ukraine to win. They say Ukraine has 0% chance of winning. They cannot win. There's no way they can win. And everything that you're seeing in social media and across the West is war propaganda. They admit this. They themselves admit it. They don't want to admit it. Angela, you remember, they're like, I don't really want to go against the official accounts of the Ukrainian government, but basically, it's all made up stories, tactical vignettes of tactical victories within the reality of operational defeat, the big picture. So there's that. We have to remember that Ukraine is not a sovereign country. It hasn't been since 2014. It is a captured country. Russia is liberating it. What Russia does with it after this process, I don't know. And maybe there's room for debate there, but there's no room for debate in terms of, did Russia invade a sovereign country? No, it did not. It was not sovereign since 2014. People need to keep that in mind. So just like you said, Angela, I think that's a good way to end it is, if you want to help Ukraine, tell the West to stop sending in arms and trying to bleed Russia to the last Ukrainian. Stop doing that. Tell the government, the illegitimate government that has no right being in office in the first place, to surrender, have the military stand down. There's Nazis in Ukraine's military and their armed forces. There are also just plain conscripts who really don't have a choice. They don't want to fight. This has been the case for 8 years of war against Donbass. These kids get caught by the separatists or the people in these breakaway republics, and you just tell it they wouldn't want to be there. The Nazis do, but these conscripts who make up the majority, they don't want to, and it's a tragedy. You're bleeding the country out for Washington and its selfish, short-sighted hegemony that there's no reason for human life to be lost over this. So we got to keep all of that in mind. Angela and I are going to keep an eye on all of this. We're going to keep doing these updates. It's extraordinary time, so we will, usually it's like 3 videos a week and 1 episode of me and Angela. We will just do this as often as possible. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. In the video description below are ways you can help support our work. I'm going to be trying to work out a way to kind of get away from Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. If you have to pick one or the other, please pick Buy Me a Coffee instead of Patreon. And then when I come up with a solution beyond that, I will let everyone know. So thank you again, Angelo. Thank you. Your analysis is indispensable. I could not do this without you. So thank you very much. And until next time, bye for now.